All right, so today we're going to be looking at something that's well, it's a bit unsettling. We're talking about criminal governance.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, criminal governance. It's where the real power doesn't actually lie with the government, but with cartels and gangs. And this is happening right now in Latin America. And we're going to be doing a deep dive into, the articles and research that you sent over.
Okay.
Some of this stuff is, like I said, unsettling. Like we're talking about Mexican citizens being stuck in their homes.
Wow.
During a citywide lockdown because they're trying to catch El Chapo's son.
Oh, wow.
And then you've got Ecuadorian prisoners.
Right.
Who have to pay gangs just to be safe, inside the prison.
Incredible.
Yeah. And it's not just like a few isolated incidents here and there. I mean, think about this. 80 million people across Latin America. It's a huge number. They live under this kind of criminal rule.
That's a lot of people.
Yeah, it's mind-boggling. So how does this even happen? How do these criminal organizations get so much power, especially in countries that are supposed to be democracies?
Right. Okay.
Like, how does that even work?
Yeah.
And what does it mean for the future of these countries?
Yeah.
That's what we're going to be looking at today.
Okay, great.
So first, I think we need to define what we mean by criminal governance.
Right.
Because it's not just your, typical organized crime, is it?
No, not at all. I mean, organized crime is often, about profit. It's pretty simple,
Yeah.
Make money, that's it. Criminal governance, it's a different beast. It's about power. It's about control.
Oh, okay.
So these groups, they're moving into spaces where the state, the government is either failing or it's absent. And they're not just running drugs, they're providing services, they're enforcing their own laws, they're even, you could say, offering a kind of justice.
Right.
It's really like a parallel system,
Right.
a whole other government, but it's run by criminals.
Okay, so that's starting to make more sense.
Yeah.
But, still, why would criminal organizations even want to govern? Wouldn't it be easier, less risky, to just focus on their illegal activities and just rake in the cash?
Well, you'd think so, but when you look at it from their side, governing actually makes their, criminal enterprises more stable, more efficient. Like if they have control of the territory, they control the flow of everything. Drugs, weapons, people, whatever their business is.
Yeah.
Plus, if they provide the things the government isn't giving, they can get a foothold in these communities, They can even build a kind of loyalty.
Wow.
It's a strategy, a messed up one, but still.
This actually reminds me of something I read about. It was about the Amigos dos Amigos gang in Rio de Janeiro.
Right.
They pretty much run the whole Rocinha favela. They provide services. They settle arguments. The whole shebang.
Right. And that's a great example because here's the thing. For people in these areas where the government's failing them, this criminal governance, it can actually be appealing. Think about it. The official system's corrupt, or it doesn't respond to their needs.
Right.
Or it's just plain absent.
Yeah.
And a gang steps in.
Yeah.
And they give some semblance of order, of protection, even if it's, brutal and unfair.
Right.
It might seem like the only option they've got.
That's a scary thought, that a system run by criminals could actually be preferable to people.
I know.
But here's the thing.
Yeah.
This is happening in countries with democratically elected governments.
Yes.
How do we square that? Isn't democracy supposed to, protect against this kind of thing?
Well, there was this hope that when Latin American countries transitioned to democracy, that it would automatically, lead to less violence and better governance.
Right. Okay.
And to be fair, in some places it did. But in a lot of others, not so simple. You look at Mexico, you look at El Salvador. Yeah. They have democratic governments, but they've also got these horrific levels of violence driven by, these huge criminal organizations.
Right.
So the truth is, organized crime, it can do really well under both types of regimes, authoritarian and democratic.
Right.
As long as the conditions are right.
And it's not just a few, little incidents here and there.
No.
One of the papers you sent, it highlighted that 13%, that's 13% of Latin America's population, are living under criminal governance.
80 million people.
It's incredible.
It's mind-blowing, the scale of it. And it's a really complex problem. There's no, easy fix. And it's important to remember that it's not like one single cause. It's this whole mess of poverty, inequality, lack of opportunity. And this is what creates the breeding ground for these criminal organizations. They take root, they grow. And for a lot of people, especially young men who are stuck in poverty, these groups, they offer an escape. It's dangerous, but it's tempting. They promise wealth, status, a place to belong, even though it's all built on violence and it's not going to last.
So it sounds like what you're saying is that these criminal organizations, they're filling a void left by the state.
Exactly. When governments can't provide those basic needs, security, or even a sense of hope, these criminal groups, they step in. And it's like a distorted, like a twisted alternative.
So where does that leave the governments in all of this? I mean, are they just victims? Or are they, like, part of the problem? Are they complicit?
That's the big question, isn't it? And the answer, well, it's not simple, and it's often pretty uncomfortable. I mean, sometimes there's outright collusion between government officials and these criminal groups. But even when that's not happening, there are often policies in place that are just so ineffective, they're so short-sighted or even corrupt that they end up creating the perfect environment for these organizations to just take off.
So you're saying that sometimes the government's either working with the criminals or their incompetence is actually helping them.
Yeah, I mean, often it's a bit of both, which makes the whole thing even harder to deal with.
Right. So if weakness is part of the problem, is the answer just to make the state, stronger? Should these governments be cracking down harder, maybe even be more authoritarian?
That's a really common response. And, on the surface, it kind of makes sense.
Yeah.
But it can backfire big time.
Yeah.
Real strength, it doesn't come from just force. It comes from legitimacy. It comes from the government earning the trust and support of its people.
Right.
If they don't have that, they've got nothing.
That makes sense. But how can a government regain that trust when it's already lost so much ground? How do you even start to rebuild when the whole foundation seems to be crumbling?
That's the million-dollar question, and it's one that, it's one we need to talk about more. It's a long road, It takes time. Regaining that trust, it's about addressing the problems, the things that let these criminal groups, get so strong in the first place.
Yeah.
The government has to prove to people that they can deliver. They need to provide basic needs, services, opportunities, a better life.
So you're saying it's not just about, cracking down on crime.
No.
It's bigger than that. We're talking about poverty, inequality, and corruption, all of it.
It's all connected. You got to rebuild that trust between the government and the people.
Yeah.
It's about showing them, look, the state, it's not your enemy. It's not indifferent to your problems. It's here to help you build a better life.
Right, right. It's interesting. You mentioned earlier that, these criminal organizations, they gain power by actually providing services, in this kind of twisted way.
Yeah.
Can you give me, some concrete examples of what those services actually look like?
Sure. So it really depends on the place, the group, all that. But, we're talking basic necessities, clean water, electricity, the things the government should be providing but isn't. And then sometimes they even get into dispute resolution, even healthcare. Sometimes they build schools or community centers trying to look like the good guys.
It's almost it's like they're building a whole parallel society, but it's based on fear and exploitation.
Yeah, it's messed up. But it's a strategy. They see these grievances, these needs that the government's not meeting, the corruption, the lack of services, all of it. And they come in and they position themselves as the solution.
Wow.
The protector. But it's all a facade, of course. It can't last. But when you're desperate, you're feeling abandoned, it can be tempting.
It's a bit like I was reading about Pablo Escobar, the Colombian drug lord.
Right.
He was brutal, of course, but he built houses for poor people. He funded social programs, all this stuff. Was that criminal governance too?
Oh, absolutely. It's a classic example. They co-opt this language of, social justice to hide their real agenda, which is crime.
Right.
They know that if they give people these basic things, they create a sense of obligation, loyalty, and people are less likely to speak out against them.
So it's manipulation.
It is. It's about using people's needs, their vulnerabilities.
When I think about all of this, one thing that really stood out to me was the capture of El Chapo's son, Ovidio Guzman, in Mexico.
Right.
I mean, the city of Culiacan was basically under siege.
It was crazy.
While they were trying to arrest him.
Yeah.
It shows you how powerful these cartels are.
That incident in Sinaloa, it was a wake-up call, These groups, they can hold entire communities hostage. And the fact that, 29 people died during that operation, including military personnel, it just shows you how dangerous it is to confront them head on.
It's like you're fighting a war on two fronts.
Exactly.
You've got the criminal organizations themselves, but then you've also got the underlying conditions that allow them to grow in the first place.
It's a multidimensional problem. It needs a multidimensional solution. You can't just focus on law enforcement or the military.
Yeah.
You've got to get to the root of it, address those underlying causes that make these organizations so attractive in the first place.
Right, right. And speaking of root causes, another thing that I found just shocking was the situation in Ecuadorian prisons.
Oh,
I mean, prisoners have to pay gangs for protection. It's barbaric.
it really is, and it shows you how deeply rooted this criminal governance can get. Even in institutions that are supposed to be, under state control, the government can't even protect the people who are locked up.
Yeah, it's a scary thought. And it makes me wonder, is this just a problem in certain countries, or is it like an issue for the whole region?
It's region-wide for sure. The intensity might vary, but it's there. We hear a lot about Mexico, El Salvador, the extreme cases.
Right.
But even in countries that seem, relatively stable, like Uruguay or Costa Rica, there's this growing worry about organized crime and the government losing control.
So it's not just a few bad apples. It's like a systemic challenge for all of Latin America.
Exactly. And it's a symptom of these bigger problems that the region's facing. Poverty, inequality, weak institutions, this history of corruption and impunity, it's all there.
It's a lot. All this talk of violence and corruption and failing states, it's pretty bleak. I mean, can anything be done? Is there any hope here?
Oh, absolutely there is hope. The challenges are huge, yeah. But there are reasons to be optimistic. For one thing, we're moving away from these simplistic solutions, like the war on drugs, which we know hasn't worked. People are starting to realize we need a more holistic approach, something more nuanced.
Okay, so what does a more holistic approach actually look like? Can you give me like an example?
Sure. One promising approach is shifting the focus. Instead of punishment, we focus on prevention. Instead of just trying to lock everyone up, which hasn't worked, we invest in creating opportunities, especially for young people.
Okay.
The ones who are most at risk.
So you're talking about things like education, job training, social programs, stuff like that.
Exactly. We need to give people a way out of poverty, out of despair, show them that there's a future for them that doesn't involve, joining a gang or the drug trade.
Right.
Invest in communities, not just prisons.
That makes sense, but that's long term, right?
Yeah.
What about the immediate crisis? Like all the violence and the instability that's happening right now?
That's where it gets tricky. You need to contain the violence, disrupt these criminal organizations.
Yeah.
But you also have to remember that if you come down too hard, it can backfire. It can make the problem worse.
So how do you balance that? Yeah. Protect people, but not do things that make them lose trust in the government even more.
Well, one approach that's showing promise is this idea of community-based policing.
Okay.
It's about building trust between law enforcement and the people they're supposed to serve, focusing on de-escalation, conflict resolution, working with local residents to figure out what their needs are, the challenges they're facing, and addressing them.
So it's not about like the police versus the community. It's more like working together.
Yeah, exactly. Recognizing that security, it's not just about patrols and crackdowns.
Right.
It's about strong communities where people feel safe, supported.
This makes me think of something we talked about earlier about how these criminal organizations, they do well in places where the government seems distant, corrupt, unresponsive. So wouldn't giving communities more power over their own security help fix that?
Absolutely. The more involved communities are, the more power they have, the less likely they are to, fall for those promises that the gangs offer.
Yeah.
And the more trust there is between the community and law enforcement, the better they can work together to, actually fight crime.
Building trust is key. We haven't really talked about the people who are caught in the middle of all this. The young people who are tempted by like the easy money, the power, or families who are just stuck in these communities where the gangs are in control.
You're right. That's a crucial point. We can't just talk about policy and solutions, in the abstract. We have to remember this is about people, real people.
Yeah.
Their lives are being destroyed. Families are broken. Potential is wasted. It's this daily struggle just to survive in a world where violence and fear are the rules.
Yeah, it's easy to forget that when you're talking about statistics and policies.
It is. But the human cost is real. It's immense. Lives shattered, dreams broken, communities living in fear.
So what can we do? Like, how do we help these people? How do we stop this cycle of violence and despair?
Well, I think a good first step is to change how we see the people who are involved in criminal activity. See them not just as criminals, but as individuals. They have their own stories, their own needs. We need to understand what pushes them towards these groups in the first place. The poverty, the lack of opportunities, the fact that they feel excluded.
Yeah.
And then we need to offer them real alternatives, not just the threat of punishment.
So not just locking them up, but giving them a way to, like, turn their lives around.
Exactly. Rehab programs, job training, social support, things that help them get back on their feet, become part of society again.
I get it. It makes sense. But I got to be honest. The scale of this problem is overwhelming.
Oh, no.
We've only just scratched the surface. It feels so deeply rooted. Like, where do you even begin?
You're right. It's daunting. But don't give up hope.
Yeah.
The fact that we're having this conversation, that we're trying to understand the problem, that's a start.
Okay.
It's a step in the right direction.
That's good to hear. I need that optimism, for sure. We've covered a lot, but I still have so many questions. I'm really interested in exploring the role of the international community in all of this.
Right.
I mean, what can other countries do to help Latin America deal with this?
That's a really important question, and it deserves a whole conversation on its own. It is. It's a big one. It's easy to, look at Latin American governments and say, hey, this is your problem, fix it. But I don't think it's that straightforward.
Yeah, no, I agree. It'd be pretty naive, right?
Totally.
To act like this is just a Latin American problem.
Yeah.
The rest of the world, especially wealthy countries, I mean, they have to play a part here too.
Right.
Both in, admitting how they contribute to the problem and actually doing something to help fix it.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's get into that a bit. How is the international community, how are they actually making this problem of criminal governance worse in Latin America?
Well, I mean, think about the demand for illegal drugs in wealthy countries. That's huge. I mean, that demand, it fuels the whole drug trade. It gives these criminal organizations so much money, so much power. It's basic economics, supply and demand. As long as people want those drugs, someone will supply them, and these criminal organizations are stepping right up.
So you're saying that countries like the U.S., Europe, with their huge appetite for, cocaine, heroin, all those drugs, they're basically funding these criminal organizations.
It's a tough truth, but yeah, that's a big part of it. And it's not just drugs either. The international community, they also make it easier for these groups to launder money, traffic weapons, all these illegal activities that, help them thrive. So before we start pointing fingers, we got to look in the mirror a bit.
Yeah, fair enough. So what can we do then? What are some real steps that the international community can take to actually help?
Lots of things, really. I mean, for starters, we got to tackle that demand for drugs at home. And then we need to support Latin American governments who are trying to make things better. Give them resources to fight this.
What does that support actually look like?
Well, it could be financial aid, helping them strengthen their law enforcement, their courts, all of that. But it's got to go beyond that, too. We need to support social programs, economic development, anything that promotes, good governance, transparency.
Right.
It's about empowering those communities, not just giving more weapons to the police.
So it's about that holistic approach again.
It's exactly. Same as we were talking about with domestic policies.
Yeah.
You got to attack this problem from all angles. You address those root causes, the poverty, the inequality, the corruption, and you support the governments that are actually trying to make a difference.
One thing that keeps coming up for me is that this idea of cooperation.
Yeah.
No one country can fix this.
Yeah.
No matter how much money they have, how good their intentions are.
I completely agree. We need a level of international cooperation that we haven't seen before, not just between Latin American countries, but with the whole world. I mean, think about it. These criminal organizations, they don't care about borders.
Right.
They use the differences in laws to their advantage. Yeah. They see a weakness in one country, and they exploit it.
Yeah.
To really fight them, we all need to be on the same page. It's a global threat.
So you're thinking about, countries sharing information, coordinating their law enforcement efforts.
Exactly.
Targeting the money that these criminal organizations are making.
Right. And it's more than just, chasing bad guys. It's about countries sharing your knowledge, helping each other out with expertise, working together to tackle those root causes, the poverty, the inequality, the corruption, all of it.
I mean, that's a tall order, isn't it?
It is.
Given all the political stuff, and all the history between countries.
Oh, absolutely. But it has to happen. The stakes are just too high.
Yeah. The
future of Latin America, the security of the whole world, it depends on us figuring this out.
Even with all the, the statistics, the stories, all that, I'm feeling a little bit hopeful, actually.
Yeah.
I mean, there are people out there, organizations, they're working hard on this, they're dedicated,
Yeah,
and there are solutions, even if they take time and they're complicated.
I agree. And remember, even the toughest problems, we can solve them.
Right.
If we put in the effort, the political will is there, and we're willing to, shake things up.
Yeah. Human beings are pretty resilient, right?
We are.
I mean, history's full of examples of people overcoming incredible challenges.
Exactly.
I think that's a good place to leave it for today. It's easy to get overwhelmed by all this,
Yeah.
but every little bit helps, right?
Absolutely.
Every action, every step we take, it can make a difference.
It can.
Well, thanks so much for talking with me today. This is a really, eye-opening deep dive.
You're welcome. It was great talking with you, too.
And to everyone listening, we hope you learned something today about criminal governance in Latin America.
Yeah.
It's a tough issue, no easy answers, but by understanding it, we can start to find solutions. And we can work together to make things better for the region and for the world.
I hope so.
Until next time, keep diving deep.